Welcome to the darkest chapter in Villisca's history, a house shrouded in mystery, where a gruesome tragedy unfolded, and the echoes of the past still haunt its walls. Join us as we step inside the infamous Villisca Axe murder house, where an unsolved horror lingers to this day. Brace yourself, for this is where nightmares become reality. Welcome to the true story of the Villisca Axe murder house. Sometime around midnight between Sunday, June 9th and Monday, June 10th, 1912, a person or persons entered a modest house in Villisca, Iowa, and bludgeoned to death 8 people sleeping there, including 2 adults and 6 children, aged 5 through 12. The killings became known as the Villisca Axe murders and are easily the most notorious murders in Iowa history. The murders spawned nearly 10 years of investigations, repeated grand jury hearings, a spectacular slander suit and murder trial, and numerous minor litigations and trials. The horrific crime made and broke political careers. Legislation was written in response to the murder, including the establishment of the current State Bureau of Criminal Investigation's predecessor. On Sunday evening, June 9, 1912, Josiah Moore and his wife Sarah took their 4 children, Herman, 11, Catherine, 10, Boyd, 7 and 5-year-old Paul to the Children's Day service at the Presbyterian Church. Accompanying them were Lena, 12, and Ina Stillinger, 8, neighbors who had asked their parents' permission to stay overnight with the Moore children. The Children's Day service was an end-of-the-year Sunday school program. Sarah Moore was a co-director, and her children performed their little speeches and recitations along with the other Sunday school members. The service ended with a social mingling that lasted until at least 9:30 p.m. When parishioners left on that cloudy, damp, and cool night, no one suspected that neither the Moores nor their overnight guests would be seen alive again. They walked the 3 blocks to their home. Cookies and milk ended the festive evening, and all went to bed. Sometime after midnight, the killer or killers picked up Joe's axe from the backyard, entered the house, and bludgeoned all 8 of its occupants to death. By 7:30 a.m. on June 10th, Mary Peckham, an elderly neighbor to the west, became concerned that the Moore house seemed quiet and deserted. She called Joe's brother Ross, a local druggist, who arrived at about 8 a.m. to look around. His cautious inspection of the downstairs revealed 2 figures covered with a sheet in the back bedroom, and he also saw blood on the bedstead. Ross stepped back and away from the crime scene and called Joe's hardware store, telling employee Ed Selly to fetch Marshall Henry, Hank Horton, because something terrible had happened. Hank arrived about 8:30 a.m., went through the house, and found, as he told Ross when he came out, somebody murdered in every bed. The partially cleaned murder weapon was left leaning against the south wall of the downstairs bedroom, where the visiting Stillinger girls were found. The killer had added 2 bizarre touches to the murder scene. The first was a 4-pound piece of slab bacon leaning against the wall next to the axe. The murderer also had searched dresser drawers for pieces of clothing to cover the mirrors in the house and the glass in the entry doors. On the kitchen table was a plate of uneaten food and a bowl of bloody water. All the victims were found in their beds, their heads covered with bedclothes, and all had their skulls battered 20 to 30 times with the blunt end of an axe. The ceiling in the parents' bedroom and the children's room upstairs showed gouge marks, apparently made by the upswing of the axe. Though Lena Stillinger's nightgown had been pushed up and she'd been left exposed, doctors concluded she had not been sexually abused. Lena also had a bloodstain on her knee and an alleged defensive wound on her arm. The Moore Stillinger funeral services were held in Villisca's town square on June 12, 1912, with thousands in attendance. National Guardsmen blocked the street as a hearse moved toward the firehouse where the 8 victims lay. Their caskets, not on display during the funeral, were later carried on several wagons to the Villisca Cemetery for burial. The funeral cortege was 50 carriages long. At 5:19 a.m. the morning following the murders, the Reverend Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly left Villisca on board the westbound number 5 train and allegedly told fellow travelers there were 8 dead souls back in Villisca, Iowa, butchered in their beds while they slept, he said. Even though the bodies had not yet been discovered, Kelly had arrived in Villisca for the first time the Sunday morning of the murders and attended a Sunday school performance by the Stillinger girls before departing early Monday. He returned 2 weeks later and, posing as a detective, joined a tour of the murder house with a group of investigators. Authorities first became interested in Reverend Kelly a few weeks after the murders after being alerted by recipients of his rambling letters. Kelly, the son and grandson of English ministers, had suffered a mental breakdown as an adolescent. Since immigrating to America with his wife in 1904, Kelly had preached at Methodist churches across North Dakota, Minnesota, Kansas, and Iowa. He'd been assigned as a visiting minister to several small communities north of Villisca, where he developed a reputation for odd behavior. He'd also been convicted of sending obscene material through the mail and had spent time in a mental hospital. A grand jury indicted Kelly for Lena Stillinger's murder, and he was interrogated throughout the summer of 1917 while in jail awaiting trial. On August 31st at 7 a.m., Kelly signed a confession to the murder, saying God had whispered to him to suffer the children to come unto me. Kelly recanted his confession at trial, and his case went to the jury on September 26th. The jury deadlocked 11-1 for acquittal. A second jury was immediately impaneled, but acquitted Reverend Kelly in November. No one else has ever been tried for the murders, and the crime remains one of the most horrific unsolved mass murders in American history. But the horrors of the past often cast long shadows into the future, and now we venture into another chapter, a tale just as macabre and perhaps even more disturbing. Join me as we venture to New Orleans and I tell you about the Axeman of New Orleans. For over a year, from May 1918 to October 1919, the city of New Orleans, Louisiana, was in a frenzied panic over a roaming serial killer dubbed the Axeman. The first to succumb to the sharp blade of the Axeman was an Italian grocer named Joseph Maggio and his wife Catherine on May 23, 1918. As they lay sleeping in their apartment above the Maggio grocery store, the killer cut the couple's throats with a straight razor before bashing in their heads with an axe. When law enforcement began to investigate, they found the bloody clothes of the murderer, as he had obviously changed into a clean set of clothes before fleeing the scene. Police ruled out robbery as motivation for the attacks, as money and valuables left in plain sight were not stolen by the intruder. Near the couple's home, a message written in chalk read, "Mrs. Joseph Maggio will sit up tonight. Just right, Mrs. Tony." Investigators immediately questioned several people, but all were released for lack of evidence. A little more than a month later, another couple was attacked in the early morning hours of June 27, 1918. Louis Bazimer, a grocer, and his mistress, Harriet Lowe, lived in quarters at the back of the store. When no one opened the store in the morning, they were discovered lying in a pool of blood. Bazimer had been struck with an axe above his right temple, and Lowe was hacked over the left ear. Though badly injured, both were still alive. Once again, people were questioned, and one man arrested, but they were later released. Though the crime made the newspapers, of bigger note to some was the scandal of the mistress. After the attack, one side of Lowe's face was partially paralyzed, and on August 5th, she had surgery performed in an effort to correct it. 2 days later, she died. But before she passed, she told authorities that she suspected it was Louis Bazimer who had attacked her. Bazimer was then charged with murder and served 9 months in prison before being acquitted on May 1, 1919, after a 10-minute jury deliberation. On August 5th, a third similar attack was made on a Mrs. Edward Schneider who was 8 months pregnant. As the 28-year-old lay in bed, she awoke to see a dark figure standing over her and was bashed in the face repeatedly. Shortly after midnight, she was discovered by her husband, who was just returning from work. Her scalp had been cut open, and her face was completely covered in blood, but she survived the attack to give birth to a healthy baby girl 2 days later. One man was arrested on suspicion but soon released for lack of evidence. By this time, investigators began to publicly speculate that the attack was related to the previous incidents involving Bazimer and Maggio. Just 5 days later, yet another grocer, a man named Joseph Romano, was attacked on August 10th. The elderly grocer lived with his 2 nieces, who awoke to the sound of a commotion in the adjoining room where their uncle resided. The girls entered Romano's room to find that he had taken a serious blow to his head and saw the assailant was fleeing. The grocer, though seriously injured, was able to walk to the ambulance once it arrived, but he died 2 days later due to severe head trauma. The girls were able to provide a brief description of the killer, a dark-skinned, heavy-set man who wore a dark suit and slouched hat. Other clues of the crime were similar to the previous ones, such as the scenes were often ransacked but nothing was ever stolen, that the killer used the owner's hatchets and blades, that panels of doors or windows were chiseled away to gain entry, and that the majority of the victims were Italian. Yet another in a series of murders and assaults by the Axeman created sweeping fear in the city. Police were inundated with reports from citizens claiming to have seen an Axeman lurking neighborhoods, axes, chisels found in backyards, and doors and windows that appeared to have been tampered with. People began to carry loaded shotguns, and family members took turns watching over their families at night. One report alleged that the Axeman was masquerading as a woman, another that he had been seen leaping over a back fence. The people were afraid, determined to protect themselves, and bordered on panic. But perhaps the heat generated by that terror was somehow transferred to the Axeman, as the killings and assaults stopped as quickly as they had started. Over the months, the fear waned, and the neighborhoods returned to normal until March 10, 1919, when the Axeman struck again. Charles Cortimiglia was an immigrant and grocer who lived with his wife, Rosie, and 2-year-old daughter, Mary, in the town of Gretna, just across the Mississippi River from New Orleans. When screams were heard coming from the Cortimiglia residence in the early morning hours, neighboring grocer, Lorlando Giordano, rushed across the street to investigate. There he found that the three had been attacked. Rosie had awakened to find her husband struggling with a large man wielding an axe. When her husband fell to the floor, the assailant turned on her as she held her daughter and begged for their lives. Undaunted, the killer slammed the axe down on both mother and daughter. When the neighbor arrived, Charles lay in a pool of blood on the floor as Rosie stood in the doorway with a serious head wound, clutching her deceased daughter. The couple was rushed to the hospital where both were treated for skull fractures. Charles was released 2 days later, while his wife remained in the care of doctors. Upon gaining full consciousness, Rosie stated that the attack was made by neighboring grocer Lorlando Giordano and his 18-year-old son Frank. Though Lorlando, a 69-year-old man, was in too poor of health to have committed the crimes, and Frank Giordano was too big to have fit through the panel in the back door, the pair were arrested. Though Charles Cortimiglia denied his wife's claims, the Giordanos were charged with the murders and would later be found guilty. Frank was sentenced to hang and his father to life in prison. After the trial, Charles divorced his wife. About a year later, Rosie Cortimiglia reversed her claim, stating that she had falsely accused the two out of jealousy and spite. With her claim being the only evidence against the Giordanos, they were released from jail shortly thereafter. Following the Cortimiglia murders, New Orleans was again filled with terror and once again began to arm themselves. The police stated that they believed all of the crimes to have been committed by the same man, a bloodthirsty maniac filled with a passion for human slaughter. Then a new twist came upon the scene when the Times-Picayune newspaper received a taunting letter on March 14, 1919 that promised another attack. Hell, March 13, 1919. Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I'm not a human being but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe besmeared with blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis Joseph, etc., but tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it was better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need of such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as the most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the angel of death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 on next Tuesday night, March 19, 1919, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going well, then so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it on Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse. Hoping that thou wilt publish this, that it may go well with thee, I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of fancy. Per the killer's statement that no one listening to jazz on March 19th would get the axe, the music flowed from homes across much of the city. Dance halls were filled to capacity, and professional and amateur bands played jazz at parties at hundreds of houses around town, and no one was killed. For several weeks all was quiet, but people still lived in fear. On August 10, 1919, another grocer named Steve Boca was attacked in his bedroom as he slept. Boca awoke during the night to find a dark figure looming over his bed. Suffering from a blow from an axe, he survived, and upon regaining consciousness, he ran to the home of his neighbor, Frank Ganusa, where he lost consciousness and collapsed. He was then treated for his injuries but was unable to remember the details of the attack. Like others who had been assailed by the Axeman, nothing was taken from his home, and a panel on the back door of the home had been chiseled away. On September 2nd, a local druggist named William Carson escaped the lethal Axeman when he fired several shots at an intruder who had broken into his home. The killer left a broken door and an axe behind. On September 3rd, 1919, a young girl named Sarah Lohman was attacked with an axe while she slept in her locked and shuttered home. When neighbors came to check on the young woman who had lived alone, they discovered her lying unconscious on her bed, suffering from a severe head injury and missing several teeth. Though she suffered from a brain concussion, she recovered. A bloody axe was discovered on the front lawn of the building. Once again, New Orleans was in a state of hysteria, but nothing more would be heard from the axeman for nearly 2 months. The last attack came on October 27, 1919, when grocer Mike Pepitone was slain. That night, his wife heard a noise and arrived at the door of the bedroom, just as a large axe-wielding man was fleeing the scene. Pepitone had been struck in the head and was covered in his own blood. His murder left his wife and 6 children behind. Mrs. Pepitone, the mother of 6 children, was unable to describe any characteristics of the killer. The usual clues had been left behind. If you found this exploration of axe murders both chilling and intriguing, don't forget to show your support. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling content, and be sure to hit that notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on our bone-chilling stories and investigations. The authorities continued to work on the case, but it would be in vain. Pepitone's murder was the last known of the Axeman killer. He was never seen or heard from in New Orleans again. As we conclude this chilling journey through history, remember that the echoes of these gruesome acts still reverberate in the annals of time. These stories serve as a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human soul. If you found this exploration of axe murders both chilling and intriguing, don't forget to show your support. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling content, and be sure to hit that notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on our bone-chilling stories and investigations. Thank you for joining us on this unsettling voyage. Stay vigilant and may your nightmares remain only stories told in the safety of daylight.